Hi guys, it's Caroline, and today I'm going to be doing my March wrap up. Now, these are not all the books that I read in March. I read 16 books. However, 9 of them completed prompts for the Tis to Damn readathon, and I did an entire wrap up just for that readathon, and links in the description. You'll see it on the screen, so check that out if you want all thoughts on all 16 books I read. The other 7 I'm going to do here in its own separate little video, and without further ado, let's just hop right in. I read Black Buck by Matteo Ascaripour, and this is about a Black man who was like top of his class in high school at a very prestigious high school in New York City, decides not to go to college. 4 years later, he finds himself working at a Starbucks. And one day, this like hotshot CEO of a tech startup walks in, and Buck, as he later gets nicknamed, is sort of decides randomly to pitch this guy a different drink. This guy is really enamored by it, and off he goes. He starts working for this tech startup. It's sort of like written in the structure like this is a self-help guide to becoming a better salesman, which is interesting, although it kind of loses that like halfway through, it kind of forgets. I had really mixed feelings about this. On certain levels, I thought it was hilarious. It is a satire, and that it did a good job of looking at like people of color, specifically Black people in tech spaces and startup spaces. However, I had some issues, despite the fact that I really enjoyed that aspect. I thought the romance was really bad. I had a hard time fully connecting with the main character because he made a lot of like stupid decisions that I didn't agree with. He often turned to violence at times where I thought that was unnecessary. And also like the sex stuff was weird. Like it was a really horny book in a way that I didn't think did anything for my reading experience. Overall, I'm not even sure what the message was supposed to be. I don't know. I have a hard time understanding what I was supposed to get, and because it's a satire, I feel like I want to know what the author's point kind of was. I gave it 3.5 stars. I'll definitely be reading whatever this author puts out in the future because I think he has a sharp, funny writing style that I really appreciated. Okay, next up is The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson. I gave this 4 stars. It's a nonfiction book, and it is a biography of Winston Churchill, but specifically like during World War II. Even more specifically, most of it takes place before the United States was a part of World War II, which I found really interesting. Growing up in the United States, I really only learned briefly about what World War II was like before America got involved. So it was very interesting to learn about like the bombing of Britain and like London, because I actually hadn't learned a ton about that. It was also helped by the fact that my mom and I have recently started watching The Crown. So season 1 has like a lot of Winston Churchill stuff in it. So I felt like I was getting sort of Winston Churchill in the 50s from The Crown and Winston Churchill in the 40s from the book. And it just kind of gave a complete picture of who he was. And I thought it was interesting. I'm just not huge on the whole biography front. So it's like only natural that it only got a 4. It does get boring at parts for me, but overall the fact that it was able to capture my attention the entire time just meant that like it did a good job, because this isn't something that I normally gravitate towards. Next up is Barrel Fever by David Sedaris. Now, I grew up listening to David Sedaris audiobooks in the car on family vacations, which is maybe a bad parenting decision. We go with it. He talks a lot about North Carolina, which is where he grew up, and I am from South Carolina, and my dad's from North Carolina, so I really resonate with that. But he also just tells like hilarious stories, and I don't know what like books and stories I read as a child or listened to because it's been so long, but all his 2 most recent books, like I have read. So I wanted to start from the beginning and read all of those and like remember some of them. So I started with the first book or collection that he ever published, which is this. And honestly, it kind of fell a little bit flat for me. I only gave it 3.5 stars. I think some stories were really funny, and I think some stories just like really missed the mark. It doesn't feel as mature as some of his other work feels to me, which makes sense because this is his first book, and I've like grown up, I guess, reading stuff that's like later. And I don't know, I feel like some of it didn't really tie together. I certainly prefer his essays to his stories, and I think, and maybe this is wrong, but later on he does tend towards the essay rather than the story. So I thought a lot of the stories in here were misses, whereas I thought the essays were hits. Next up is Fake Accounts by Lauren Euler. I'm not 100% sure. So basically this is a book about a woman who is like with this boyfriend, and she's kind of over it, and she like sneaks a look on his phone and finds out he's got this account that's a conspiracy theory account, and she's like, I already want to break up with him. So she goes on this trip, and while she's gone, she gets a call that he has died. And she feels really bad because she was planning on breaking up with him, and she maybe feels a little bit of relief, and it's sort of about her life, yada, yada, yada. I found this book to be a little bit insufferable. I gave it 3 stars, but the reason I found it insufferable because the way it was written just felt like the author was patting herself on the back. And for context, this author is a literary critic in real life who notoriously dislikes books a la Sally Rooney. She's like super anti-Sally Rooney. She thinks she's like overwritten and overwrought, and it's this whole issue where I think her main thing is that she has issue with how Sally Rooney's characters often understand that they have white privilege and like talk about other political issues, but never actually really like do any real activism. And so she feels like they're just checking a box. But this book did no activism whatsoever. So I don't know why this author thought she's better than anyone else. And even when asked in an interview, like, why aren't you so afraid to like publish a book after you've like critiqued so many people's books so harshly? And she was like, well, because I just wrote a good book. And so I don't know that I vibe with that reaction. And I also didn't think it was actually that well written. I think it was very overwritten. She did this weird thing of breaking the fourth wall with this chorus of ex-boyfriends. I think it was really hard to feel attached to any of the characters. And I think that the main character just like didn't do much. She just was like wallowing, and she had the ability to just live in Berlin after this breakup with like no real job, which is such a privilege, you know, and she talks about this privilege and being able to get the visa and stuff like that. But like, again, there's no activism, there's no addressing it. And the way it's written is you really feel like the author is patting herself on the back for how well written she thinks this book is. Next up, I read The Sinister Mystery of the Mesmerizing Girl by Theodora Goss. That is the 3rd book in the trilogy, The Extraordinary Adventures of the Athena Club. So I've now completed that trilogy. Very exciting. I gave it 4 stars. The first book is sort of all these girls coming together who are related to famous men from Victorian literature. So like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, Frankenstein, Moreau, things like that, and they've all been experimented on, and they kind of have this club and they have adventures, and they're trying to stop other people from being experimented on, and other characters from literature like come into play, whether as evil or as good, and it's very interesting and fun and silly, and I like this one a lot. It was shorter than the second one, and it was just a lot of good, clean fun. Sherlock and Watson played a larger role in this one. They didn't so much in the second one. You know, it's not a perfect book. It does break the fourth wall, and sometimes I think that's interesting, but after a while it gets to be kind of old and repetitive and seems really gimmicky, so that's not my favorite. But you know, in the end it was just good, clean fun. Then I read Detransition Baby by Tori Peters, which I gave 4 stars. Now this is a book about 3 women, and I'm going to try my best to do the gendering correctly. So one is a transgendered woman who used to date another transgender woman who then detransitioned back into a man. And that man, Ames, is dating a just cis woman who is also his boss. Okay, cool. So he gets his boss pregnant, and he has all these complex feelings about gender and his identity, and worries that being a father in this heterosexual seeming couple is like too much for him. So he asks his ex-girlfriend if she would be willing to be kind of like a co-parent. She's always wanted a child. She just can't have children. So she really is like excited about this prospect, despite the fact that there's this weird family dynamic. It does dive a lot into the like identity of being a transgendered person, and I think that was really interesting because there were a lot of aspects that I just like never thought about, and it really helped me like see what that's like and what kind of thoughts just they like think all the time, and what it's like to live in their body, whether you are questioning or detransitioned or just fully transitioned. And I found that to be really interesting, and I enjoyed it. I think my reason it didn't get like the full 5 stars was that it lagged a bit in the middle, and also the premise is so strange, not because of the idea of like a non-normal family structure, but rather like the idea that this woman would like find out this secret about the person she's trying to have a baby with, And like, that's fine. But then that she's okay with like an ex-partner getting involved without having previously known the ex-partner, and that being like a very serious ex-partner. And then also we like barely address the fact that Ames is her like subordinate at work. It was a little far-fetched on that end. And so that had like gave me a little bit of trouble like sinking into that. But I actually found it more interesting when we had flashbacks and we learned about the characters in their past. Lastly, I have The Project by Courtney Summers. I gave that 3 stars. Now, Courtney Summers wrote Sadie, which I really, really enjoyed. I was really looking forward to The Project. The Project is a cult book. It's about 2 sisters, and the younger sister gets in a tragic like car accident that kills the parents, and the older sister, when the younger sister is like in the hospital, kind of finds this cult and finds like God through the cult. And then we skip forward several years, and the younger sister is trying to like get back in touch with the older sister, figure out what's going on with the cult, kind of do some investigative journalism. Now, I just saw this, like, I saw all the plot stuff coming a mile away. There was no surprises for me, and I just never got fully invested, partially because I just could not buy what this cult was selling whatsoever. And so I just felt a little aggravated with the people who really did. And I think sometimes there are cults where I can understand why other people would be in a certain place that they would buy into it. But I just like, I kind of thought the people who went for it were just gullible. And I couldn't understand how it wasn't more like publicized, because it seemed like a really big cult and that they really did some bad things. So I just didn't understand why they hadn't been like found out yet. Also, the 2 girls, the 2 sisters, it was really hard to distinguish who was like speaking, whose head we were in, because they sounded exactly alike. It wasn't the best. I think I don't like cult books. Alrighty guys, those are the 7 books that I read that didn't count for Tis the Damn Readathon prompts. Let me know what you read in March, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!